What's up everyone, today I'm going to go over all the best PVE enchants. There's a surprising amount of people who aren't actually using the most optimal enchant for your build. This can be costing you damage and time in dungeon runs. The best enchant for you is usually dependent on your talents as well as what you're actually fighting. So you should watch to the very end of this video to find out the best enchant for you. Detonation is the first enchant we'll cover. It's arguably the most well-known enchant for things like hell modes, and that's because it's incredibly strong when you're attacking multiple groups of enemies. This is because of two things. You're dealing AoE damage with the explosion, so you can kill a lot of things very fast. Not to mention, the more things you're hitting at once, the faster the detonation proc count will go up, therefore the more explosions and damage you're dealing. These are incredible upsides, but unfortunately it's not exactly optimal for single target damage or when you're fighting bosses. This is because damage multipliers don't apply. For example, the Enforcer weapons, their crit only applies one chain stack overall, so on top of the damage multiplier nerfs, detonation does have some downsides. Although overall, I would still 100% use this thing for hell modes and farming layer 2s, as the explosion insta-gripping things and essentially the free damage that it provides is incredibly useful. The next enchant we're covering is Astral. This is probably the second most well-known enchant in the game because it's incredibly rare and incredibly powerful. That's because it always provides a flat 15% buff to PVE damage. However, this does come with the downside of it being extremely rare, but it also doesn't have a secondary effect like many other enchants do. Overall, if you can somehow get your hands on Astral, it's 100% worth doing because it's good for virtually everything. But an enchant with an even higher damage buff than Astral is Grim after it procs, because it gives a 20% damage buff. Something very important to note is this acts as a debuff for enemies and not a buff to your damage. This is important because it lets you bypass the 175% damage cap. This thing also stacks with other things like Auto Scream and Taunt, meaning that at max you can actually get a 55% extra damage onto an enemy. Plus, Grim gets better the more people you're using it with, as everyone gets the extra 20% damage. Unfortunately, Grim's only really good for high HP targets, so if you're just trying to kill low HP enemies, Grim's not really gonna be that useful. Plus, it doesn't really have an effect until it actually procs. Overall, Grim is incredibly good for all layer 2 bosses, due to the long stuns they go into. So if you're farming layer 2s, Grim is kind of a must-have for damage. The next is actually kind of weird. It's Providence Thorns. Providence Thorns deals extra damage after a certain amount of parries. This is incredibly good because if an enemy requires you to parry quite a lot, you can proc Providence Thorns a ton, dealing extra damage for free. Plus, the extra hit can also build up chain stacks, so it's very good on Ferryman. However, Providence Thorns doesn't give an M1 damage buff and is largely useless for all layer 2 bosses since they're normally invincible until they're stunned, and when they're stunned they can't attack you. Overall, if you're planning to do a lot of Ferrymans, I'd recommend Providence Thorns. Now, Umbral Knight is another thing that provides a 20% damage buff, although it does this every 3 to 4 seconds and counts as a second hit. So it's good for bosses that go into undamageable states quite frequently, such as Kaido or even Chaser. However, Grim really isn't that good for multiple enemies. The 3 to 4 second cooldown between the extra 20% damage is a huge problem when you're fighting swarms of them. So if you're planning to do Kaidos or Chasers and want an extra burst of damage, then I would 100% recommend using Umbral Knight. Chilling is probably the most well-known enchant in the game, as it used to be by far the best, due to it proccing twice per M1. It's still incredibly good though. If you don't have something that's constantly proccing Nullifying Clarity, Chilling will do it on every M1, and is still a 4% free damage buff without. Not to mention, it works on Crystallization. For those of you who don't know, Crystallization also has PvE scaling on it. However, if you do have something that's proccing Nullifying Clarity, it's not really worth it. There's many other enchants on this list that provide a bigger damage buff overall, but if you're not proccing Nullifying Clarity, this is an incredibly useful option, because with Nullifying Clarity on top of it, you're effectively getting 19% damage from this enchant on every M1. Now there's 3 final, more niche enchants. These typically only have one major use. Stone is good for dukes on an enforcer's weapon due to posture damage, although it doesn't provide a direct damage buff. Storm is good for Surge Path because it can proc rods on hits, plus the Lightning Strike isn't bad either, although it's completely outclassed by Umbral Knight's ability. And Vampirism is good if you're taking a lot of damage, since it allows you to get some healing every time you M1 something. So yeah, there is a lot of different enchants to use. It's not a bad idea to carry around 2 or 3 on your PvE build. Personally, I carry around a ton of enchants. Anyways, I hope you found this video useful on finding out what PvE enchant you should use. Make sure to like and subscribe because there's a ton of PvE content coming soon, and I'll see you next time.